So we'll wait just one more minute before we start the festivities, but I want to say hello to everyone. Greetings. I'm in Houston now. It's a lovely sunny day here, and I'm happy to report that it's a lovely sunny day here rather than rain, which is nice. So really excited to see so many people signed up for this webinar today. It's an exciting webinar. The Go Fair US collaborated with the Data Curation Network. Michaela and I worked hard to put this together, and we have just a wonderful group of people, esteemed experts here to run the roundtable and to speak to us today about data and governance and what's happening in our academic institutions in these spaces and where we're maybe heading. I'm really happy too to see not only we did a nice job at sort of cross community marketing here. Happy to see lots of people that we know, a lot of new names for me, but also we've got people from research computing. We've got people from academic libraries. We've got data experts from a range of other kinds of organizations. So wonderful, wonderful. I will just note, just so you all know, we had more than 200 people register, which is really exciting. And we'll be able to share this going forward as well. So Michaela and I aren't going to have any slides. We decided we would just move forward into the roundtable. There's so much to talk about. And so before I start, I think both Michaela and I just want to make a quick announcement about upcoming events for our respective organizations. I will say that. So I think here, there we go. I'm dropping, oops, we want to put that in for everybody. Oh, I don't know. I guess I
got you,
okay.
Melissa. You're good.
Okay, thanks, Michaela. So Go Fair US for at the end of the month, we'll be having another webinar partnering with ORCID on January 31st, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. ORCID's role in the fair data ecosystem. And so Shauna Sadler, who's the outreach and partnerships lead at ORCID, will be presenting on that webinar, and it'll be moderated by our colleague Nancy Hobel-Heinrich. So just want to mention that that's happening January 31st. At least I have the right year, 2023. Here we are. Okay, so that's me. Michaela, did you have an announcement?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm the director of the Data Curation Network, and we have a really exciting training coming up in collaboration with the National Institutes of Health. This is an in-person workshop that will be hosted on the NIH campus in Bethesda, Maryland. This is an application process to be accepted because we are looking for librarians that might not have support in curating and managing research data, as well as researchers who might be new to managing and curating and sharing their research outputs. So you can find information about that in-person workshop in the chat. And with that, I can turn it over to you, Abigail.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Michaela and Melissa, thank you for all of the coordination and getting everything set up so that we get to have this conversation today. So welcome, everyone. So delighted to see you. Right now, we are at 96 attendees. So I'm so pleased to see everybody who has joined us today. For those of you I have not yet met, I'm Abigail Gobin. I'm an associate professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago in the University Library. I'm the data management librarian. I also serve as our data policy advisor. So I'm in the Office of Research, and what that's looked like for the last 2 years is mostly I've been thinking about the NIH Data Management Plan, as I'm sure many of you have as well. So this morning, we're going to be talking about questions of data governance related both to administrative data and also to our institutional data. We have all of this data, we do all of these things. Where does it go? What happens next? Where are we going? And how that all falls under what kind of governance we are looking for, what we're anticipating. We have a delightful group of panelists, and we're going to start with a quick introduction from each of them. We've asked each of them to speak 3 to 5 minutes to introduce themselves and their work, and then we're going to move into some Q&As that I'll moderate. If you have any questions during the session, please go ahead and feel free to drop them into the Q&A. You can also upvote them so that we can see which questions are really of interest to the audience. I'll be keeping an eye on those as our panelists are communicating. A reminder that today is being recorded and a recording will be available afterwards. So if you have to pop out early or if you have colleagues who couldn't attend today, there will be a recording. So I'm going to start with Lisa for introductions. Lisa Johnston.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Johnston, and I'm really excited to be here with this webinar. I am currently the Director of Data Governance at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Prior to this, I came from the research data world. I was at the University of Minnesota for about 15 years, leading up our research data management efforts on campus, as well as directing the data repository for the University of Minnesota, or DRUM. I also was the PI for the Data Curation Network, succeeded wonderfully here by Michaela, so it's really great to be here and partner with you on this. In my current role, I just wanted to take a few minutes, which I think we have, where each can give a little bit of extended introduction. Great. I just wanted to point out a few things on our website. I'm not going to use slides. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the key aspects of our program for you, just to give you some context of where I'm coming from and where we've been at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So our program was actually established in 2015. So it's a relatively newer program in the university community. And I'd say we're moving into that level of maturity where we've got all of our foundations in place, and now we're really kind of digging into some of the more meatier issues and questions. Our program was chartered by a joint executive sponsorship of our provost and our vice chancellor for finance and administration. We have four main pillars that really all seek to fit under this idea of developing and creating a culture of data-informed decision-making. And this is all within the larger context of the university's mission. So really our role of data governance is to ensure that we can do our work at the university in the most effective way. We focus on data stewardship. We do have a program of 12 different data domains with data stewards in each of those domains who report up to data trustees. And all of this people infrastructure is really what helps set priorities and drive decisions with our data and our use of our data. We also really focus around data quality. I work in the same office with our data warehouse team and our BI and data analytics staff, who are subject matter experts in a lot of our different data domains and who really are understanding where there might be issues as they're analyzing the data and pinpointing those issues to bring back to our stewards and to our other stakeholders to figure out how we can fix that issue. We have another domain focus in our program around privacy and ethics, really trying to understand how we balance the use of our data versus all the potential risks of our data. And one of the key things that we've developed for this pillar is a domain called core person data. So each of our domains, whether it's HR or finance data, has an element of people in it. And we understood that we really needed to bring together a group to come and make decisions about how we use data that involves people across the organization and in a much coordinated way. And then the last pillar there is really around the policy issues that we work on. We do have an institutional data policy. We work on developing data definitions and standards for implementing data integrations or other data access and authorization protocols. So really that's a lot of a major effort of this program as well. Underlying all this is our training program. At a university, I think we're really unique in the fact that unlike corporations, unlike even really the government, we really have to rely on a distributed network of individuals who have responsibilities for doing data governance. And so our training programs and our really our ability to empower staff to help us make all of these decisions is, I think, one of the most critical components of a university-based data governance program. So I will stop sharing there. Hope that was a brief introduction, not too long, and I'll turn it over to Abigail.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. I'm like jotting down quick notes. I'm like, make sure you ask Lisa about. So that's perfect. David, let's do you next.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm David Butcher. I'm the FAIR Data Management Specialist and a research faculty member at the National High Magnetic Field Laboratory. The MAG Lab is a national user facility. It's primarily funded by the National Science Foundation and somewhat by the state of Florida. And it has the mission of providing the highest magnetic fields for user research across a variety of fields, including chemistry and biochemistry, as well as materials development, condensed matter physics, and a variety of others. And data governance is an important subject at the MAG Lab because we host a large number of users every year across a variety of different scientific disciplines who come from both public and private institutions around the world. And as a result, data collected by users might be affected by a variety of different policies or practices from the users' institutions and their funding agencies. And because NSF is a major funder of the MAG Lab, like I said, NSF policies related to data management apply to all user projects for which the user does not pay to use the instrumentation, which is the vast majority of them. Specifically, the NSF's public access policy and the requirements laid out in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, or PAPPG, apply to all of our user projects. On top of that, our post-field facility, which is one of our 7 user facilities, also receives funding from the Department of Energy. So for the post-field facility, both DOE and NSF policies apply to the research. And because of all these policies, the MAG Lab has a responsibility to make sure that data, publications, and other materials are all being made publicly available in a timely manner. And to do that, we need to have some clarity about data governance and who exactly is the steward of the data for all of our user projects. And disentangling the relationships and figuring out who exactly is considered the data steward or owner and what they need to do to fulfill the reporting requirements or other legal obligations can be pretty difficult. The MAG Lab places the responsibility on generally whoever is registered in our user system as the principal investigator, but that person, that may not reflect the actual arrangement within a particular research group. For example, we host a lot of graduate students and postdocs at the lab, and they may or may not actually have the responsibility of data stewardship. That's about all I wanted to say. Thank you all for being here, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And Pega.
Hi, everybody. I guess I'll answer one of the questions. There were no slides, and David did not have his.
Yeah, no, we
So
didn't ask for slides.
Out on something, you didn't miss out. So just to say that I don't have any slides, I was just going to tell everyone what I do and what our university is doing. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer for UC San Diego. My name is Pega Parsi. I've been here about 5 years, and somewhat uniquely in higher ed, I'm not positioned in a compliance space. I'm not a compliance office. I'm an operational office. And so I get to participate in research projects and do a whole lot more beyond sort of legal and policy compliance. As part of that, I do sit on our Research Data Governance Committee. University of California just recently updated its research data policies to just clarify ownership and stewardship and all of those things that we're talking about. We place our stewardship directly on our PIs and our researchers, but obviously our ownership is with the university. That gets a little tricky when we're talking about some of the institutional data, our student data, our HR data, that sort of thing. And I'm sure we'll get into that. One thing I wanted to talk about with regard to governance, sometimes I notice we have different definitions of governance. My colleague, I don't want to call anyone out without telling them that I'm calling them out, but my colleague Melissa Barnett from Georgia State, I think many of you probably know her. She had this great post about how she describes data governance, and she says she's the Marie Kondo of data for the university. She takes all the mess and helps, well, their data governance program helps organize things so that, you know, when you walk into a closet, you know where everything is, you know how to find it, and it's ready for use. And of course, in addition to that, it's not just organizing and making sure your closet is, has things that are easy to find and you know where everything is, but it's also important to know how are we going to use those things. Are we going to wear, this outfit to this event? Is that appropriate to wear this outfit to this event? I'm sorry to use such a sort of crude analogy, I suppose. But that's what we're talking about when we on our campus talk about data governance. We don't just talk about the organizing, but also things like consent, appropriate use, future harm to individual participants, and also harm to society as we use data. So I think it's very important to have both of those pieces together. The organization part, the findability part, accessibility part, but also appropriate uses and those sorts of things. The other thing I wanted to say is, also our university is very much in the thick of going through the APARD report. I don't know if any of you were participating in that. That was the AAU and APLU put together this great series of workshops, which ended up with a report called the Accelerating Public Access to Research Data. They worked with NSF and multiple other agencies to come up with this report that gave guidance to campuses that are looking to move forward with their open scholarship, open data processes. I do sit on that. Thank you for putting that in the chat. I do sit on that steering committee to help our campus move forward in that. If your privacy officer is not involved in that, pull them in. Sometimes people like to use privacy and security as reasons not to do something, but that's not in fact what our roles are. Privacy and security are there to enable in an appropriate and ethical way for people to be able to do some of the research and some of the exciting work that we do. So involving your privacy people, we're not supposed to be the no people. We're not the no people. We're here to help with that. The other thing that I help with is I advise our IRBs. Our IRBs do not, I think like many of yours, do not review for in-depth or comprehensive privacy or security compliance. They, it's not within their guidelines to look at that level of detail. And of course, the privacy and security world have changed so drastically just in the last 5 or 6 years that I think the IRBs, most of them would say that this becomes such a niche thing and requires such expertise. We don't have that level of expertise. So privacy officers, security officers are becoming more involved in that way. We are also working on coming up with guidelines when we want to use administrative data or data we've collected for other purposes, wanting to use those for research purposes. Many times our researchers want to access student records, student data, or tap into our student body for their research purposes. And our students have pushed back and said, we're not just your captive research participants. You need to let us know, you need to get our consent, you need to do all the other things that you would need for privacy purposes. So we're also working through that, coming up with a new review panel that reviews for things like privacy, security, EDI concerns, over surveying of our students, resource needs, all of those sorts of things. So I'll stop there. I've been talking quite a bit. I'm sure we'll get into more in the Q&A.
All right, fantastic. Thank you all. I'm just like, oh, I went to ask like this and this and this, and so many different things. So I wanted to, it's interesting, we talk about, and thank you so much for that different, the multiple definitions of data governance. And thinking about, like, David, you were saying, who is the steward? Who is the owner? Who's responsible? There's so many different people who are really involved with this. And as you were talking about that report, I was also brought to mind of the recent announcement of the Year of Open Science, right? I'm just barely, the new NIH policy goes into effect next week. We are 6 days out. And now we're immediately pivoting to the response to the OSCP memo, the Nelson memo from last August, where we're waiting on those responses for more open data and more sharing, and this Year of Open Science from the White House administration and all of that. So I wanted to go back to So something I've heard from a couple of different institutions, and I think it's good to kind of poke into a little bit, is the idea of institutional data versus research data. We know there's some overlap. We know sometimes, like, one colleague of mine, they have very great data governance for institutional data, HR data, personnel data, finance data, those kind of things. And research data isn't included in their data governance at all. Like, it's just this separate Wild West over here where we haven't thought about it. We don't know where the servers are. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about either a challenge that you've run into with that, or a way that you are trying to bring those two together or keep them clearly defined. Lisa, I'll call on you first.
Yeah, my first thought was kind of trying to answer why that might have been for your university. And I'd say at Wisconsin, we have a similar kind of distinction to be made between research data and institutional data. And institutional data, we define similar to how you gave those examples of data that we generate as doing our business as a university, which is separate from the data generated by our researchers as a part of their research. I think it could be possibly that it gets back to what Pega was saying about the intended use of the data, the appropriateness of the data. Research data is generated for a very particular use, and that use is built into the proposal. And there's a lot of incentives and reasons why there would be potential reuse of that data beyond that proposal. The funders have made that clear that that's the main reason we want a data management plan, is so we can reuse that data. And our publishers are encouraging reuse through data availability statements. So that potential for reuse and that broad understanding of what that reuse could potentially be is really inherent to the research process. With our institutional data, the use is more narrowly defined for good reason. First, the way we collect our data, we hopefully are telling our participants and our individuals that we're collecting the data from, what is that use that we're collecting this information from you? We need your phone number for a particular reason. It's not to send you ads or call you about things that aren't relevant to you. It's for a very particular need or a very particular use, and we will hopefully not abuse it. So the use of how we collected that data, the intended purpose of that data, it gets to a much more granular level with institutional information. So managing the usage of it is already inherent. We're already kind of starting from that position where we have to manage who can get access to it and use it for an appropriate purpose. So that could be part of the reason behind it. And I think the other main difference that I see with our institutional data governance and our research data governance is the interoperability piece. Our research data that we're collecting at our universities, it's one piece of a domain's data that's housed at one university, but it actually would probably fit with a lot of other universities' collection of that similar data. We collect data, as a university in these various different scientific or, arts, humanities, different domains, but it's a part of a larger society or body of that particular subject in that particular domain. So that's why data repositories are quite useful. Subject data repositories or other data repositories that are really trying to bring similar types of data together. The same thing is happening within our institutional data, and that the governance needed to make data interoperable is so critical. And the understanding of what that data is through our definition process, through our data lineage tracking, understanding the transformations that were made to that data, going from one system to another system, that's a huge part of our job. And so that governance is happening for our institutional data for a very specific purpose. So again, I see a lot of the same parallels for research data and institutional data governance. But they have slightly different audiences and slightly different aims in terms of making those data interoperable.
Great. Thank you. So many comprehensive thoughts. Pega, David, do you want to add on to that?
I mean, for the Mag Lab, there's a very important distinction between institutional and research data. Institutional data is generally kind of closed off and proprietary because that includes things like magnet designs and other things that need to be kept secret. And then the research data is the much more public-facing component, which can be made publicly available. So there's kind of an important distinction there for us.
Great.
I think, conceptually try to make that distinction between purely administrative data and then research-generated data. But very quickly, as many of you know, it gets really intertwined and complicated, right? Again, to use the student information data, a lot of our researchers want to look at that. A lot of our education researchers, a lot of our economists want to put together our student data with information from from labor and statistics, right? To do economics types of things. So it gets very complicated very quickly. So we don't really draw, like I said, we conceptually draw that, but I don't think in practice that necessarily guides our thought process. Instead, from at least a privacy perspective, we look at the purpose for which the data were given or provided or generated, right? Why did the student give us this information? Why did the research participant give us this information? Who collected this information? We have one of our researchers that accesses the entire Twitter database. We have another one that accesses that has access to all of Uber's information. We don't give Uber our information in order to be research participants, right? None of you do necessarily. But at the end of the day, it ends up with a researcher who uses it. That's how we ended up with the whole Cambridge Analytica Facebook fiasco a few years ago. So it's important for us instead to look at, why do we have this data? What was the initial purpose? And then our subsequent uses, are they in line with that? Or do we need to give extra notice? Do we need to get consent? What are some of the mechanisms that we need to have in place for that? So that's not a sort of clean answer for what you're asking, Abigail, but that's sort of how we think about it here.
No, nothing in this is tidy. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I would love to pivot a little bit to this idea of ownership and stewardship. A couple of you spoke a little bit about it, and I want to pull in a question from Megan O'Donnell. So we have these, Pekka, I believe you said the PI is the steward, and David, you talked about how you have people who are designated as the stewards, but maybe they're a grad student, maybe they can't actually take that stewardship. One, I want to ask, does anybody have a favorite list for data stewards? Because I have a couple of different checklists, but I'm always looking for a new one, and I'm sure others are as well. But I also want to pull in Megan's question. Do you see a future where data managers as a role are a requirement, particularly I think for our research projects, but also our institutional projects, rather than, oh, the PI can do it, where we start to see more of that? If yes, how long might that be till we see that? Pekka, you want to take a stab at this one?
I'd like to defer to other people on that one, if you don't mind.
I can comment on the data managers being a requirement. Over the past several years, the importance of proper data management has been emphasized more and more in policy documents and recommendations from a variety of different institutions, funders from the United States government and others. In order to do that job properly, it's almost certain that you need individuals with the appropriate skill set who can dedicate at least a significant amount of their time to doing that job. It's not really enough to simply put that responsibility on existing researchers or personnel and expect it to get done properly. Now, of course, there's always issues with funding, right? If you want new individuals in an institution to do that kind of job, it's going to cost money. And that's where funding agencies often, balk at actually having that responsibility fulfilled. So it seems like a thing that's absolutely necessary, but there's been pushback from the higher levels as to actually getting it done.
Okay. And just to follow up on a question we had in the chat, the difference between a data steward and a data owner. I know when I think about it at my institution, if we get a grant in particular, right, we get an NSF grant, that grant is actually given to the university, and the university owns the data. They are the ones who should have long-term access, long-term preservation responsibilities. I really see it as a two-way street. Lisa and UNM had an amazing data policy I go back to every time, where it says, this is the responsibilities of the university to the research data. This is the responsibility of the PI. This is the responsibility of the library. When we talk about data, and that's ownership. So we tend to think about that from often an IP perspective. From stewardship, it is you who is responsible for the day-to-day to make sure it's backed up, make sure it's generated appropriately, follow the ethics and procedures. Lisa, I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. The word owner, in fact, we try to avoid using it in our governance program at Madison because it is not true. It doesn't really accurately imply, that authoritarian control over the data. The university is the owner of our institutional data and our research data. However, the university as an entity is a pretty poor doer at everything. We have staff and roles and responsibilities of those staff to do the work of data management and data stewardship. So for research data at Wisconsin, we similarly also assign that role to the PI. The PI is the primary steward of their data, and we have a data stewardship policy at Wisconsin that defines that role, and they themselves can then assign responsibility to somebody on their team to be the data manager or to take on some of those duties, but they are ultimately responsible that the work is done. And in fact, that's why we have all of our offices supporting research, our cybersecurity office, our IT offices, our research compliance offices, all supporting the PI and making that happen. So they're not alone. They are really, I would say, well supported at our research institutions in making this work happen. It's just usually a varying degree of how can we better communicate the role of all of these services that are positioned around the PI, and better work together across our offices and across some of our silos in our organization. That's always going to be a challenge. Maybe on the institutional side, it's a little, I think, I don't want to say easier, but we have assigned data stewards within our different data domains who take on a really critical responsibility, and it's maybe a little bit more we can see their actions taking place. So they are responsible for reviewing data products before they're published, before they are released. They are responsible for classifying data, which then leads to a lot of decisions about security and access. So the data steward's role is pretty integral as we're onboarding a new system, for example, that will house institutional data, or when we're producing a visualization or a Tableau report. So they're already embedded in that process, and they work with the data product creators to both get access to the data in its source system or in its warehouse, and then also at that production side of things, as the data is being released, they're there to classify the data and to figure out, what is that appropriate level of access. So the stewardship role is very critical in both cases of institutional and research data. I think it might just be a matter of how we position all of those offices and services around it, because it's still going to come down to that one person who's going to need to really rely on a larger group of experts and tools and staffing at our institutions, and really making that very clear that they're not alone.
Okay.
Yeah. Going back to the data manager's question, whether or not we think that that's coming soon or not. I don't know if they're coming soon. The thing that we try to do is work with our academic senate, work with our faculty to actually embed data management principles, privacy principles, and security principles in our regular curriculum. So for the future, so our students that are going to be the future researchers in the world have a much better data literacy, moving forward, as opposed to where we're starting with now, where we're trying to teach, seasoned professionals more about privacy and data management. And they're saying, I've been doing this for 50 years. Why are you talking to me now? And we have to say, well, the things have changed in 50 years. So we're trying to embed that in our curriculum. We also, this might be a different way of looking at things. We're also starting to move a little bit away from data owner and data steward type of language, and instead talking about data fiduciaries, because as some of my colleagues here have pointed out, the ownership piece gets very complicated. When we talk about the university being the owner of research data or institutional data, what we mean is in relation to the researcher. The researcher is not the owner of that data, but the university is. But that's not the end all be all. The university is not actually the owner of Pega's information or Abigail's information. Abigail is a whole person and it's her data, right? So she is the owner of her data and she has particular rights to that data. So for that reason, we stay a little bit away from using the term owner of data. It gets very confusing for folks. And instead say, we have your data for a particular purpose, and we have a responsibility to you and to the community to use it and protect it in a particular way. So I don't know if that's a helpful thing for folks or not to think about it.
I love that approach. I love that. I love that term data fiduciary. I wrote it down right away. I was like, ooh, because I love that. I love that different perspective. It's really, what is our responsibility to the data and when is that responsibility? And there's some really great questions coming in. I will just let you know, we've not been able to see that. I know there's conversations also happening in the chat. We're trying to figure out, I can't see them. So if there's we can't see them. So if there's other questions in the chat, please do throw them in the Q&A. But we're trying to make sure we can see those. So if you do have questions, please throw them there. One other thing I wanted to kind of touch on is, we talk about FAIR data, right? This is from GoFair, this is from DCN. We know there's a lot of emphasis, and we've already talked to new reports and new initiatives on open data and sharing data, and we see all of these different opportunities to collaborate and reuse data. And most of the time, I'm really excited about that. But I wanted to, think about that. Pega, from your perspective, where do we run into kind of hard lines or problems or challenges with wanting to move towards things being open, accessible, interoperable, reproducible, and really considering the data fiduciary and considering protections and harm and reuse?
That's a big question, Abigail. That's something that we're struggling with, and I don't have a good clean answer for that. But what we've come up with so far, again, it's not the thing that fixes all the issues, but what we've come up with is that we involve our community in our decision-making processes. For example, I have students that sit on every single committee and governance group that I run. We sometimes invite people from the external community to sit on our groups. We make sure we have quite a diverse group of people that we bounce ideas off of, to make sure that we're at least taking into consideration things that we might not otherwise know. Sometimes researchers and institutional researchers in particular tend to think of data as data, right? When they see a data set, they're like, this is the data that I'm working with. And we instead urge them to think, no, that's still a Lisa and an Abigail and a Pega. Those are still people. So to think of it, once they start thinking about it that way, that anything that they do has some sort of consequence. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's something good happens, and sometimes something bad happens. But we need to think about both of those things. Use of data is not good or bad, right? Collection of data on its own is not good or bad, right? We have information, we want to use information, but we need to think about what we can do that's beneficial to society and what might cause harm in society. Sometimes you have to take off your good person hat and put on your evil person hat just to think about what can go wrong, right? If I am not a terrible person, but were I to be a terrible person, what could I do with this information that we've gathered? Once we figure that out, that doesn't mean don't do it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't collect it or you shouldn't use it. Instead, I think what it means is let's stop, take a breath, and put in some safeguards, put in some guardrails, make sure that we're actually protecting it so that we can enable all of the awesome world-changing types of research that we do.
Fantastic. There's been a couple of questions about staffing. Right? We asked, Megan's question from earlier, and we've got a couple of different questions about FTEs. Lisa, how many FTEs do you have? Pega, how are you staffing some of this? And David, I'd be interested to hear this as well. Like, what, right now for us, it's committee work and it's piecemeal. Like, I'm the only data management librarian at my institution, and I'm not a 1 FTE on that yet. So what does that look like at your institutions?
Well, at my institution, I'm the only individual working on data management, even part-time. I think it's technically 0.5 FTE, though it winds up being more than that. The Mag Lab has a three host institutions, but our primary one is Florida State University. And they do have individuals who work within the science libraries and who work on open science and data management. But the Mag Lab has such unique needs that they're not always able to assist with particular issues. So right now, it's basically just me.
Lisa?
Yeah, as for staffing in my office, our office is actually merging with another unit right now. So our Office of Data Management and Analytics is moving with our Office of Academic Planning and Institutional Research. So I think all combined will be about 20-25 FTE, but a lot of us are in the office are working kind of on the analytics side of things and doing more of the institutional research side of things. In terms of data governance, it's really a community approach. So I work with our team of data stewards, and also we have a data governance council that really brings together all of our different data officers and our domain representatives to really work on some of those meaty challenges that we don't have policy or regulations for yet, and we work through a lot of committees as well. So the other one I would add, though, is, this is kind of top heavy in our organizational structure with governance. I kind of want to really expand and understand who all of the other fiduciaries are, individuals who are really in a position of trust. So I also work with data analysts who are positioned across all of our schools and colleges, who are the point person for accessing and interpreting and producing reports about our data. That's a really important, strong governance role. And how do we really build up that community of individuals who are the primary people to understand that data, to maybe be the first ones to identify data quality issues, and really build out the governance structures so that it's a community of individuals who are kind of taking on this work. Because I don't think you could just keep adding 4 FTEs and call it good, because our needs are so great, and we have to kind of embrace that distributed approach a little bit too.
Also distributed approach here. very much working through committees. The thing that we struggle with is that everyone cares about this, but it's no one's primary responsibility. So when things come up, let's say, I don't know, a pandemic, and you have other things to deal with, that data management or public access, those kind of, although everyone again cares about them, it's no one's highest priority. So we are putting together our steering committee to make asks to have dedicated people that this is their job to work on this and only this will be their priority and they can move it forward.
I bet if you ask Lisa, she'll send you her job description. I wanted to, this is lovely. It leads into another question we got very early, which is about, if you're thinking, we tend to think at the university level, like that's where I tend to be, is up here, 50,000 feet, 13 colleges, all these different concerns, but it is very much distributed down to individual colleges, individual departments. So if somebody wants to start with getting involved with data governance, where do we start for them? How does somebody in a department, one of those analysts, Lisa, how would they get started? Or Pekka, how would they join that governance with you?
Our steering group opened up the conversation to our entire campus and said anyone from any discipline is welcome to join and have, give us your thoughts. So we had several different listening sessions for folks. The main thing that we do is we are also a top-down approach, but in this instance, we can't be too much. All we can do is give guidance, give tools, give resources, give training to folks, and then empower them to make their own decisions. Every discipline has its own needs. Every college, every division, every researcher has their own needs. And it's not, at least from my perspective, appropriate for a giant university to dictate down to that level. Instead, we should give the tools for them to make the responsible and good decision and then know where to go for additional questions or answers or guidance.
Yeah, I just wanted to strongly echo that, at a large university, a large research institution in particular, the role of distributed data governance is so important. And I think offering up sort of our baseline minimum expectations for how data needs to be managed and how data needs to be secured, accessed, stored, all of that is our role at the central level. And we do that through policy, but also I think more importantly through training and through guidelines and through other kind of human readable information. And then what I've been doing is just going out and talking to the different schools and colleges. And what I'm hearing, and I'm still relatively new at my organization, is that they do have structures in place. So some schools and colleges have a data governance council or data governance group that gets together to think about these issues and to think about their particular needs. And that is really exciting to me because they are going to be the domain experts for that particular school. They're going to be able to understand their challenges in a way that I and maybe a few of my staff and our limited resources would never be able to do for the entire campus. The main point then is that how do I make sure that our kind of governance structure with a capital G is talking to all of the other governance structures around campus and that we are really aligned and communicating with one another. So not only setting those baseline minimum standards, but also hearing, listening to all of those stakeholders who are interpreting those standards and coming up with exceptions or needs for other rules that might not exist and creating those communication channels. So I'd say that it's the distributed piece adds that, kind of layer of complexity that can be kind of daunting at times because governance is kind of built to be top down, but it's the only way to go in a university structure, in my opinion.
Right. Thank you.
We also have communities of practice. I don't think that's a surprise for anybody. So different disciplines can all come together and share their practices so they can learn from each other.
I wanted to draw on a little more controversial question that we got from Robert. It's his question I will read for the audience. It's unreasonable to expect project personnel to be the ongoing steward of data. What are your thoughts on that? David, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm wondering in the context of the question, what is meant by ongoing? I mean, theoretically, at least, stewardship responsibilities kind of not end at a certain point, but they become less of a day-to-day concern. Once data is made publicly available in accordance with, whatever policy is relevant, then it's basically a hands-off kind of thing after that. Assuming that you've placed your data in some kind of open repository or something like that, I suppose there is a responsibility to ensure that the repository remains available, doesn't go offline. But even that is not like a constant issue. I do agree with the overall sentiment that researchers should not be vested with an overwhelming amount of responsibility, because researchers already have a lot to do, and additional data management responsibility is not desirable.
Could I jump in on this one too, Abigail? I think I'm really excited to hear this question because it touches on an area that I'm really passionate about, which is data archiving. So I guess I would make this a distinction of the responsibility of the project personnel to determine what data from their project should be archived for long-term access and use. So that selection, that curation of that data, that is the important data, the component of data that needs to be preserved and archived, making that decision, and then hopefully, in the best case scenario, transferring that responsibility over to a data archive so that they are no longer the ongoing steward for that data, because you're absolutely right, projects are temporary, they move on to new projects. Instead, they're transferring that stewardship responsibility over to a trusted data archive.
I echo everything that's been said. And also, I'll also add, when we try to do otherwise, we get some faculty revolt. They don't want anybody else being their data managers at the same time saying, well, I don't have the resources to be the data manager myself. So that's a needle we have yet to meet.
That is the hard one. Absolutely. That is absolutely hard. So there are a couple of questions about, there's some interesting questions about the use of fiduciary and the, owner. I think it's one of those challenges. Words are so imprecise, right? English language is still imprecise. So when we say owner, when we say steward, when we say fiduciary, they have different meanings. And I don't know if we're going to get to all of those today. We are at 11:52, and I wanted to, before we got too near to the end of things, I wanted to ask, what are you so I'll ask for two things. One, what is something you're really excited about that you see in terms of interoperability, sharing data, open science, those kind of things? What's something you're really excited about in the next, say, 2 years? And also something that you're really concerned about or worried about. And David, I'll ask you to start.
I guess as far as something I'm excited about, just the amount of kind of discussions within specific disciplines about what's missing, where the gaps are in the procedures that we have related to data sharing, and making that kind of easy for researchers. There's been a lot of discussion that I think is moving things in a positive direction. Obviously, we all have to have kind of a shared sense of what the problems are before we can start to solve them. And I think we're getting that. And there are even some projects in motion that are aiming to solve some of those shared problems, not just in a very general sense, but for very specific disciplines, like, for instance, materials development or condensed matter physics, which are very, very specific disciplines of research. So I think there's positive movement. And I think within the next 2 years, we'll see real tools that researchers can directly implement without too much difficulty to make their lives easier and to make data sharing easier. As far as something that I think is a problem, or that I'm not excited about, nothing comes to mind right now, but just give me a moment. I'm sure I can come up with something.
Great. Saga?
I'm also struggling a little bit with this. but I will say I'm excited that we are finally getting to the actual meat of open science and open scholarship, and putting efforts, putting resources, putting people in place to actually have this conversation and move it forward in a systematic and organized way on our campus, and hopefully nationwide, internationally, really. What I do worry about is that most places are not thinking or involving their privacy and security folks and their EDI folks in these kinds of conversations. Thinking again that those people either don't have a place or they're obstacles to this. So what I would like to do is to just ring that alarm and say, no, your privacy officers are quite delightful people. I work with them all the time. We all work together nationwide because we have to go back to the FTE question. Most places don't even have a privacy office, don't have a privacy officer. There are a handful of universities that have like one FTE for privacy. That's starting to change just a little bit. The way that security folks used to be 20 years ago, where you kind of just had one person working on it. And now, 20 years later, you can't imagine a university that doesn't have a full security office. I think the same thing is going to happen with privacy. I'm both excited about that and a little bit scared that some of these things are leaving the barn without that kind of thought being built in.
Lisa?
Yeah, I guess I'm really looking forward to better understanding the use of our data. You know, there's really not a lot of good reasons to keep data around if you're not going to use it. But understanding the metrics of how data is used, both in the research world, you know, being able to track citations of data reuse, and in the institutional academic data community, understanding how our data is being, you know, extracted from systems and merged with other data and transformed and then actually successfully used to drive decisions in our organization. That's really the key. So we're stepping up in our efforts to really be able to track the usage of our data. We're really trying to understand kind of the end point of where that data is pulled from, and then where does it go? How does it get used? That to me is going to be the most exciting piece, is to kind of get to the bottom of you know, what are the decisions that are coming out of it. And I think we haven't mentioned it yet today, but there's a wonderful article. Christine Borgman, Amy Brandt just wrote up an article in Science about universities and the needs that our administrators and our other executive staff are looking to use our data for. And I think that really kind of speaks to why we're trying to put these structures into place so we can use it. The thing that worries me most, and again, I don't remember hearing this word come up, is, you know, when does data collection become surveillance? And where do we draw that line for both our students and also our employees? Because there is a lot of data that we're collecting that maybe doesn't have an intended purpose, because it's easy to collect, because it's coming off of our systems. It's coming through our interactions with technology. It is just available to us in new ways. So how do we really position ourselves as a university? What do we want to stand for when it comes to monitoring behavior through technology and through data collection? And when is that monitoring not appropriate, or that data is not meant for a purpose, so we don't keep it around? So I guess I place that in the worry me category, because I think that's a really hard conversation to have. And I think I'm worried that our students aren't as involved as they need to. And I liked some of the examples that Pega had brought. Bringing students into your committees, I think, is so important. Finding representation from your campus from all different sectors is a challenge. So really important.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a robust conversation, and I have a whole new page of notes and things that I want to look at, which is never a bad way to end things. So Michaela and Melissa, thank you so much for letting us have this conversation, and I will turn us back to you.
Yes, and thank you, Abigail, for running this great session. Thanks to everybody, our expert speakers for being here today, and Michaela for partnering on putting this together. I think there are opportunities for new kinds of conversations like this. So over the next year or two, we look forward to keeping us out there on the leading edge. So thanks very much, everyone. Michaela, I'll turn it over to you.
Yep, just thanks all. We'll post the recording of this video to the Data Curation Network's YouTube channel, and we'll share out a brief blog post of our discussion and all of the wonderful resources you all have shared with us.